Hello everyone, welcome to lesson 8, Future Street Planning. So this is probably going to be the last lesson of Yolosaurus Goes All in season 2. Here are some of the topics covered. Geometric growth of pot. So how do we increase the pot in a similar ratio on every street? Secondly, we're going to talk about the stack to pot ratio and how we should adjust our strategy accordingly. Thirdly, we are going to be trying our best to understand single raise pots, 3 red pots, and 4 red pots better. And lastly, we'll think about how to adjust for dip stacks as well as short stacks. So what do I mean by geometric growth of pot? So the aim of geometric growth is to size our bets on each street. So we want to bet the same fraction of the pot on every street in such a way that we are able to go all in by the river. So this gives us a rough idea on how large we should actually be betting post-flop. So here's the formula for the geometric growth of pot. So S refers to the effective stacks preflop, P refers to the pot size, R refers to the bet size as a fraction of the pot, and N refers to the number of streets that we are going to be betting. So we have the formula here. 2S divided by P equals to 1 plus 2R to the power of N. When we actually manipulate this expression here and we isolate R on the left side, we get 0.5 2S divided by P root N minus 1. So we can actually just use this formula. You can just memorize it or write it down somewhere. But actually it's not that necessary to memorize it. I think you're not going to use it in game. Just do it for your study outside the tables, off the tables. Okay, so let's put the formula to use to help us know how large we should be betting on every street. Yeah, okay, so for this first example here, let's say that the small blind raises to 3 big blinds and the big blind calls. So let's say that the effective stack sizes are 100 big blinds. The pot will have 6 big blinds after adding the 2 times 3 equals to 6, right? N equals to 3. In this case, we are trying to put all the money in with 3 streets of betting. So we're going to bet the flop, the turn, and the river. And we want to find out R in this case, which refers to our bet size as a fraction of the pot. So you just insert all these numbers into the formula and we'll get R equals to 1.11. So the small blind must bet slightly over the pot on every street in order to get all the money in. So let's see if the results are actually correct here. So we want to ask ourselves, will betting 111% of the pot on every street allow the small blind to go all in by the river? So we can actually test the results out here. So let me take out notepad and the calculator. So let's test the results here. So let's say the pot has 6 big blinds on the flop. And we're going to be betting 6 times 1.11, which is 6.66, right? 6. Right, so this is the pot size. This is my bet from the small blind, and this is what the big blind will call, right? We can actually further simplify this expression to 6 times 3.22, right? Because it's essentially 1 plus 1.11 plus 1.11. So we get 6 times 3.22. So on every street, we just need to multiply the pot by 3.22. So on the turn, at the start of the turn, we get 19.32. And we can multiply it by 3.22, right? At the start of the river, we have 62.2, and we times 3.22 again. So we actually get 200 big blinds in by the river, which is right, because both players start with 100 big blinds, right? And if we go all in, we are going to put 200 big blinds all together. So the formula seems to be right. So we are on the right track. Okay, so example 2. Now we have a 3-bet pot. Let's put the formula to use again. The big blind raises to 2 big blinds. The small blind 3 bets to 8 big blinds. And the button calls. So let's say that starting stack sizes are 120 big blinds. The pot has 17 big blinds. And let's say we're going to spread our betting over 3 streets. Once again, we want to find out what R should be. So in this case, we find that R equals to 0.71 after using the formula. So we can just briefly check the formula here. 2 times 120 is 240, right? 240 divided by 17, which is the pot size. 8 plus 8 plus 1. And then we just square root, cube root this. Then we minus 1. And we multiply it by half, which is effectively dividing it by 2, right? So we get about 0.71. So the small blind needs to bet 71% of the pot on every street in order to go all in by the river. So what if we wanted to use a 2-street betting plan as opposed to spreading our bets over 3 streets? Okay, so let's say the button raises to 3 big blinds. The big blind 3 bets to 11 big blinds and the button calls. So let's say now that the effective stack sizes are 80 big blinds. The pot will have 22.5 big blinds. We add 11 times 2 plus half a big blind from the small blind. N equals to 2 because we are using a 2-street bet sizing plan. What is R? We insert the variables into the equation and we get R equals to 1.24. So for this sort of situation, 3-bet pot, if you want to spread your bets over 2 streets, you typically, let's say you bet a normal bet size on the flop, maybe a half pot bet. You might have to go with an overbet on the turn, 1.5x or larger maybe, if you want to shove. It might be appropriate in certain circumstances. For example, if the board has like 2 flush draws, it might make sense to have an overbetting jamming range as opposed to betting smaller. Okay, so now we are analyzing the same situation. This time round, the only thing we change is the N, which is the number of streets. We are using a 3-street betting plan now. And we find that R equals to 0.46. So if we are using a 3-street betting plan, I think just going for a small bet on every street is probably going to be better. And I think spreading your bets out over 3 streets is probably the best play, as opposed to opting for an overbetting plan. I guess the small bet size here, which is slightly under half pot, is kind of indicative that perhaps our pre-flop bet size isn't ideal. That's a bit too large. So in example 3, we have R equals to slightly above the pot. In example 3a, R equals to 46%. And the standard size is probably between 50 to 100% of the pot. Why is this so? It's mostly because it balances having a good risk to reward ratio on your bluffs, and it also allows you to build the pot up when you have a strong hand. So this is why a bet between a half pot bet and a full pot bet is considered as standard. So I think the only conclusion we can draw here is that the pre-flop 3-bet size is way too large. So if the big blind size it down to maybe 8 to 9 big blinds, then we'll have a more standard bet size of like 60% on every street, and that should be more acceptable, I suppose. Okay, next we have example 3b. It's a 3-bet pot now. Still a 3-bet pot over 3 streets. S is the same, 80. P is smaller now because we are using a smaller 3-bet size. N equals to 3 still. So R equals to 0.5. Yeah, we just insert all the variables into the equation. 160 divided by 17 and you cube root it minus 1. You get R equals to 0.55. So the big blind must bet 55% of the pot on each street in order to get all the money in by the river. So that's more of a standard size, I suppose. What about example 4? In the 4-bet pot, the stack to pot ratio is really low, and we want to get all the money in with a 2-street bet sizing plan. So the button raises to 3 big blinds, the big blind 3 bets to 8.5, and the button 4 bets to 20. So it might be more common in a late position scenario where we have a smaller 4-bet size, especially when we have position. Okay, so stacks. Let's say we are starting with 100 big blinds. The pot has 40.5 big blinds and equals to 2. So we insert the variables into the equation again. R equals to 0.61. We find that the button must bet 61% of the pot on each street. Example 4a. So the only thing I change here is the 4-bet size. From 20 I decreased it to 17. So we end up with R equals we are using a slightly smaller 4-bet size firstly, so the P is smaller as well. Secondly, I changed the N to 3 instead of 2. So we are using a 3-street bet sizing plan, yeah. So we get R equals to 0.4 here. So the button must bet 40% of the pot on each street in this case. Yeah, so what are some suitable bet sizes? If let's say we were to use a 3-street bet sizing plan, so what you'll find is that in a single race pot, we probably want to be betting about half pot to 150% of the pot. I guess in certain spots it makes sense to have an over-betting range, as mentioned earlier in some of the lessons. But I think like my main strategy is generally to bet small on the flop, where people's defending ranges are inelastic, and then size my bets pretty large on the turn, maybe 75 to 100% of the pot. On a river, I can have anything between half pot to like 3x pot, depending on the board run out and the differences in ranges. But if you were trying to get all the money in by the river, you probably want to size your bets on the larger side, closer to pot size. So if you had the nuts, you might have to put in an overbet here or there, or maybe put in a check raise somewhere. For 3-bet pots, betting about 50% to 60% of the pot on every street makes sense on average. But I like to bet smaller on the flop once again, 40 to 50%. And thus you need to compensate it on later streets if you bet smaller earlier by betting like 80 to 90% on the turn and or the river. For 4-bet pots, I like to bet 1/3 pot, especially on like ace high and king high rainbow flops. It's just really difficult for your opponent to defend wide, especially when your 4-betting range contains many ace-x hands. So I think 1/3 pot on the flop makes sense. Maybe on the turn and river you can size it up to like half pot. Yeah, so note that the bet sizes here tends to tell us the average bet size on every street. But based on what I mentioned earlier, people defend their ranges very differently on each street. So I think there's some room to move it up or down depending on the situation and the street. stack to pot ratios. So earlier in the formula, we have the formula 0.5 to s divided by p root n minus 1. So s divided by p is basically the stack to pot ratio, right? Stack divided by pot. So what you find is that for a single raised pot, the SPR is going to be about 10 to 22. For 3-bet pots, the SPR is going to be about 3 to 7. And for 4-bet pots, the SPR is going to be about 2 to 3. I guess it could be even lower if one player uses a really large 4-bet size, or if the stack sizes are shallower. So here's a graph of the SPR against the bet size we have to use on each street. So the first chart we have here shows us how large we need to bet when we are using the 2-street bet size plan. So if the SPR is between 2 to 3, which is like in a 4-bet pot, if we are using the 2-street bet sizing plan, we probably want to bet between half pot to 75% pot. If we were in a 3-bet situation, 3 to 7, that's the SPR, we probably need to pot it or over pot it if we want to bet it over 2 streets. And the 2-street bet sizing plan just not so suitable for single race pots. Here's a 3-street bet sizing plan. So to reiterate, 2 to 3 we want to be betting like 1/3 to 2/5 of the pot. For 3-bet pots, we want to be betting about 2/3 of the pot on every street. If we are really deep, we could be betting pot on every street, or maybe even over bet. Like SPRs of over 30 tend to occur in limped pots. So it's pretty common to have a lot of limp pots in live games. Or maybe if the stacks are really deep, you might not have to overbet or put in a raise somewhere as well. So how do we adjust the stack to pot ratios that we just saw earlier? So for multi-way pots, earlier on we were just analyzing heads-up pots. If it's multi-way, let's say it's a 3-way, the pot pre-flop will be 50% larger. If it's 4-way, it will be twice as large. And of course the stack to pot ratio will be affected accordingly. And we have to decrease the R as well, since when the SPR is lower, we should be betting a smaller fraction of the pot on every street. Shallower stacks. The SPR decreases when there are shallower stacks, and the R decreases as well. Going all in for value. So if the SPR is 25, you generally don't want to be getting all the money in on the flop or on a turn or on the river willingly. Of course, if your opponent is putting the pressure on you, I'm not saying that you only need a set or better to call down, but I'm saying that if you are the aggressor, you shouldn't be the one shoving so much money into the pot if the SPR is 25. So if the SPR is 25 or above, you shouldn't be overbetting and shoving a ton of money in with like a 1-pair hand or maybe a weak 2-pair hand. Unless, of course, your opponent is bad, and then maybe you can make some adjustments. But I'm assuming the opponent is reasonable. SPR equals to 15. So 2 pairs plus probably good enough to stack off on the flop, or just fire 3 streets and put a lot of money in. So you'll find that in a lot of limp pots, a lot of fishers like to stack off when the SPR is like 30 to 40, and they put a ton of money in with like pocket aces after limping, or maybe with bottom 2, and they usually get dominated by a straight or a set. So that's a common mistake. SPR equals to 5. So that's probably in a 3-bet pot type of situation. Maybe top pair second kicker, top pair top kicker is good enough to just fire thrice for 3 streets of value. And I guess when SPR is 2.5, you should be happy to just stick all the money in with top pair. Of course, this is dependent on the situation. It's very different to have top pair in a single race pot as opposed to having top pair in a 4-bet pot. So the stack to pot ratio might be similar, but if ranges are tighter, then naturally the hands which you are willing to go on with might differ. So use this general guidelines here with a pinch, take them with a pinch of salt. Don't just blindly follow them. So let's talk about another example here. Example 5. In this case, we are dealing with 200 big blinds effective stack sizes. Let's say that the cutoff raises to 3 big blinds with 9 of hearts and the small blind calls. The flop is 9-8-4 with 2 spades. The cutoff bets, the small blind raises to 18 big blinds. And what should the cutoff do here with top 2? So the stack to pot ratio in this case is about 28.6. Starting stacks of 200, the pot has 7 big blinds. So I think as a general guide here, if you stacked off with 9-8 here, 200 big blinds deep, if you're playing in an NL 100 game against a solid player, you will probably see your opponent show up with either very strong combo draws like Jack 10 or spades, or they will probably have sets almost always. So 3-betting the flop is going to be a mistake. At 100 big blinds, I'll be more than happy to 3-bet and get it in, right? Because the SPR is going to be like 15 or slightly less than 15. But here I think it's clearly overplay. So you should just call to keep the worst hands of your opponents in. Example 6. The cutoff has pocket 10s, the small blind 3-bets, and this cutoff calls. Effective stack sizes are at 100 big blinds. So we get the same texture, the small blind bets. What should the cutoff do? The SPR in this case is about 5. 100 divided by 21 is slightly less than 5. I'm not saying that you should raise here, but I think raising could be okay. Raising and getting it in. Of course, it depends on how tight your opponent's pre-flop range is, because he might just have like he might be highly weighted towards overpass, and raising would be bad against someone with queens plus and ace king, right? But against someone with a much wider range, I think raising to get it in is going to be very reasonable. Okay, so that brings us to the end of lesson 8. I hope you guys enjoyed this lesson and learned a lot. Let me know if you have any questions, do the homework, check the answers, and hopefully you learn something new. Okay, so that's all from me. I would suggest taking a look at the other videos. So I'm going to have some coaching videos in store for you guys. So take a look at those, and yeah, hopefully you will learn how to better apply all these new concepts and principles into your own game. So thank you for watching and have a nice day.